Hey, welcome back to Dad Drinks. I'm Dad, and here every pour tells a story. And it is today, when I'm filming this, Tuesday, April 29th. And we're going to talk about the Stanley Cup playoffs. And before we do that, we're going to make a drink. And that drink we're going to make is called the Maple Leaf, in honor of the Toronto Maple Leafs, the team that I hate second only to the Montreal Canadiens. Anyway, we're going to start with 2 ounces of bourbon. We're going to put that in the mixing glass with some ice. Then we're going to add a half an ounce of maple syrup. So this is what makes it the Maple Leaf, apparently, because essentially all it is a maple-flavored old-fashioned. So, we can call it the Maple Leaf. If we're just going to replace the sugar with maple syrup, I guess we could call it the Live Free and Die after New Hampshire. I mean, they make a lot of maple syrup. Call it the Vermonter. They make a lot of maple syrup in Vermont. So anyway, half an ounce of maple syrup. And then we're just going to put 2 dashes of Angostura bitters in there. So basically, like I said, this is just a maple old-fashioned. We're just using maple syrup to replace the sugar that is in an old-fashioned. Stir it up, get it nice and cold, just like the ice in any hockey arena. Interestingly enough, most hockey arenas, professional ones anyway, are not very cold. Very warm in there. And why? Because you've got a whole bunch of people in there keeping the heat on. Even though there may be air conditioning around, but whatever. So we're just going to pour it out, strain it out into your rocks glass over a nice big rock. And then let's garnish it with a piece of orange peel. So with the orange, squeeze it, that gets some of the essential oils into your actual drink. Put it around the edge, drop it in, and there you have the Maple Leaf. Not bad. So, the Maple Leafs, let's talk about them first off. It looks like they are going to be able to close out the series tonight against the Senators. They're up 3-1. It's very interesting. Up until last night, Monday night, every team in the Western Conference was tied 2-2, and then the Stars beat the Avalanche last night, so they're the only team out of the 8 in the West that are up 3-2 and can close out their series in the next game. Over in the East, however, every team that's leading their series, they're all leading at 3-1. I don't know what that says about the East versus the West. I don't know if that means the West is more competitive. If it means that, the top 4 teams in the East are just that much better. I don't know, but it's kind of interesting that the entire West, as of before last night, was tied at 2-2, and now everybody on the other side, on the East, they're all up 3-1. So Carolina can finish it out tonight. Like I said, the Leafs could finish it out tonight. Tomorrow night, I think the Capitals are going to finish it out. The Battle of Florida, that could go either way. I mean, Tampa could come back and win, 2 straight games, tie it up 3-3, and go to a Game 7, especially since it looks like the Panthers are going to lose 2 of their guys who are going to get suspended after they go talk to the Department of Player Safety, probably sometime this evening or first thing in the morning, for their hits, Ekblad's hit to the head on Hagel, and then I forget who the other guy was that boarded Gershons, I think it is Gershon, something like that, of the Panthers. But anyway, Stanley Cup is probably, I think, for your money, probably the best playoff in any major sport. I mean, football, you basically play 3 games and then you get to the Super Bowl if you're a wild card. Or you're not a number 1 seed. You're the number 1 seed. You play 2 games. As long as you win those 2, you're in. In hockey, you got to win 16. And it's physical, and playoff hockey is nothing like regular season hockey. But the Stanley Cup comes with a lot of superstitions and a lot of stories. The Stanley Cup came from Frederick Arthur, who was Lord Stanley of Preston, who was named the Governor General of Canada back in 1892. And shortly after he became Governor General, he sat down and said, we should do something with all these amateur hockey teams. And he presented them with what was known as a Challenge Cup. And that's the top part of the present-day Stanley Cup trophy. It's just that little cup on top, and that's all they got. And for the first probably, I think it was 30 years, it would be basically amateur teams in Canada who would play throughout the year and then get to a point, at the end of the season where they find the best two teams and let them play against each other. Then what happened was the two professional leagues took that over, and the two professional leagues were the NHL and the Pacific Hockey League. The Pacific Hockey League folds, and the NHL has had the Stanley Cup ever since. That cup has been through the ringer, as it were. There are stories in the past of it being lost for weeks at a time. There's a story from the early part of the 20th century where what happened was some player brought it home with him and left it at home, and his mother didn't realize what it was, so she used it as a flower pot. Then, you get into the modern era. You have the guy who brings out the Stanley Cup every year. And his name is Phil Pritchard. And Phil Pritchard started doing that in 1994. He is the vice president of the Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto. And he sat down with Gary Bettman around 1994 and said, we should do more in terms of presentation for the Stanley Cup. So what should we do? And they decided that they would let Phil, parade the Stanley Cup around and make sure it was, secure and no one touched it. And one of the things that Phil Pritchard said to Gary Bettman at the time was, you shouldn't be touching the cup unless you earn it. And that has become a superstition. And I don't know how prevalent it was before 1994, but you have a lot of players now who, when they start out, even if they're in youth hockey and they go to visit the Hockey Hall of Fame, they won't touch the Stanley Cup because they haven't won it yet. It's a superstition that, if you touch the cup and you haven't earned it, then you're never going to win it. And that's why Phil, when he presents the Stanley Cup, when he carries the Stanley Cup around, he wears white gloves, white cotton gloves. A lot of people think that just because he's, the Hockey Hall of Fame guy, and, the Hockey Hall of Fame is basically a museum, and that's what museum curators do. That is his thing. He sat down with Gary Bettman and said, I shouldn't be touching the cup. I never earned it. So that's one of the things. That's one of the unwritten rules around the cup. And they carry that into the first set of games this year on ESPN, where Steve Levy and Mark Messier went and they hung around the cup. And PK Subban, who's the other guy who's in the in-studio hosts when ESPN does the games. Since PK Subban had never won a cup, they put up red velvet ropes around the Stanley Cup. And as Subban got close to it, the guys would close off the ropes and go, no, you can't come in here. You can't be around the cup. So that's just their way to pick on him. The other thing is that when the cup is won, one of the other things is that what's supposed to happen is the NHL commissioner, who, as I said earlier, Gary Bettman hands it to the captain of the winning team, and then the captain hoists it over his head and skates it around the ice and then starts handing it off. And usually the way that goes is it goes from the captain to the two assistant captains. And then generally after that, those teams have a way that they're going to hand it off to the rest of the team. If you've got a hot goaltender who got you through the entire playoffs, maybe that goaltender is the guy after the two assistants who gets to handle it. If you had, like last year with the Panthers, Keith Tkachuk, because that's his dad, the other Tkachuk, Matthew Tkachuk, they handed it off to Matthew and let Matthew be the guy after the captains, because Matthew was such an important part of that team. One of the things where that hasn't happened that way and where tradition was broken was in 2001 when the Colorado Avalanche won the Stanley Cup. And that year what had happened was The Bruins had done a solid to Ray Bourque. Ray Bourque had been with the Bruins for 20 plus years, had never won a Stanley Cup, had gotten to a couple of finals, and by the time 2001 rolled around, the Bruins were awful. They weren't even making the playoffs. And at the trade deadline, much like this year, where the Bruins said, we're going to send Brad Marchand off to Florida so maybe Brad can win another cup, they sent Ray off to the Avalanche. And the Avalanche bought into that whole thing. And they sat down and they came up with this whole tagline of Mission 16W, 16 wins, because that's what you have to win the cup. 4 series, 4 games apiece. And when they finally won the cup, what happened was Joe Sakic, Bettman hands the trophy to Sakic, and Joe Sakic, instead of lifting it over his head, goes, Ray, get over here. And he hands it to Ray Bourque, and Ray Bourque was the first Avalanche to hoist it over his head and skate around the ice. And I remember that whole thing. I remember I was actually on a whitewater rafting trip in New York State the day of that final game, and I got off the river, and I was supposed to stay overnight. I said, nope, I got to get home. And I rushed home and got home, I think, right as the first period was ending, and got to see the whole thing. So that was great. There are other things, weird things that happened with the Cup. 1996, when the Avalanche won their, I believe that was their second, when they won their second Cup in 96, some player left it in the hot tub because the players all basically, the way it works now is the NHL gives the team 100 days. For 100 days, you get the cup, you get to do whatever you want with it. Players can have it, the athletic trainers, the staff, the coaches, the front office. What they do a lot of times, when the Golden Knights won, they brought it to Savannah with the Golden Ghosts, with our ECHL, our East Coast Hockey League team, and they had the cup there. They brought it out to their AHL affiliate as well. So they'll do that kind of stuff, but in 96, left it in a hot tub. 2010, Patrick Kane with the Blackhawks, after they had the rolling rally, the rolling cruise, I guess you would call it, because it was a boat cruise down the Chicago River. After they were done with that, Kane grabbed the cup and found a bar and just went into a bar, and people were drinking beer and all kinds of other stuff out of the cup. In 94, when the Rangers won it, after Messier lifted the cup up and then they all skated around, a couple of days later, one of the Rangers was a guest at a wedding. It wasn't his wedding. He was a guest at the wedding, and he took the Stanley Cup to the wedding. So, for those guys in hockey, I think the Stanley Cup is so much more important to them. It means so much more to them than in most of those in any other sport. The Lombardi Trophy, it's the Lombardi Trophy, and it gets put in a case at the, whoever wins it that year. So, the Eagles are going to have it at their team facility or at Lincoln Financial Field. It's going to be sitting in a case. The World Series Trophy, it goes to their different minor league teams, and everybody gets to play with it. But, it's not like the players take the minor league take the World Series Trophy. And I don't even know what happens with the NBA Trophy. I don't even know if that thing has a name outside of the NBA Championship Trophy. But you don't hear about, those guys doing all kinds of stuff with that. But with the Stanley Cup, it's important to those guys, and it means a lot to them. So tonight we're going to find out if anybody moves on. The first, the Panthers, no, not the Panthers, the Hurricanes and the Maple Leafs are in their games, and all they got to do is win. They win, they move on, and they get to sit back and wait for everybody else. And then tomorrow night, we'll probably know what's going to happen there in the Battle of Florida, which I am really looking forward to and kind of invested in. So, cheers, the Maple Leaf, daddrinks.com, check it out. Go there, the merchandise is there, all the blogs are there, the recipe for this will be there, and give it a look. So we will see you on the other side of the first round of the playoffs. Please hit like and subscribe, and visit daddrinks.com for recipes, merchandise, and more fun stuff.